Welcome to Focus on Why. I'm Amy Rowlandson, your host. Join me to explore the compelling stories, profound insights, and captivating experiences shared by my guests from all over the world. Focusing on the importance of why, these relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations will empower, motivate, and guide you to create your own purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, have you signed up to receive my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus? Every Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes. Today, on Focus on Why, I am joined by Sarah Spencer. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy.
How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. Yes, and it's late spring, isn't it? And things are really, although we've had lots of rain, everything's really green and lush. So, I love this time of year. So, yeah, I'm feeling great. Thanks.
Well, usually I say, what is it you're focusing on? But before we do that, I just want to ask, do you have a favourite time of the year?
Well, it's a really interesting one, actually, because I used to really not like winter and I used to love spring. And I really realized that actually through, a lot of the development and work that I've done over the last few years is actually I've really learned to embrace all of the seasons as their sort of uniqueness. And so my relationship with the weather and the seasons has really, really changed, really for the better. And I think also exploring the dynamic between that kind of really big burst of growth in the spring and that letting go in the autumn and then having that pause in the winter. It's actually really, I'm much more in tune with how life actually operates through the seasons and through all the different ways of that life works, really. So, on a personal level, that connection with the seasons has been much deeper, and therefore I love them all. Like they're like my children. I love them all equally, but differently.
And we are lucky in the part of the world that we are in that we have seasons that are so dramatically marked because some places don't have the clear, defined seasons as much as we have in England.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, for a lot of people, it's a double-edged sword that they really do feel in winter that there is, that low. And obviously in the UK, most people have got a vitamin D deficiency, so that kind of feeds into that winter blues. But learning to embrace that downtime. So I do more of my writing in the winter. I do some crafting. So I do really plan my year out in terms of what fits best. More in-person courses, and the nature connection, working with teams in nature, obviously fits much better into the spring, summer, autumn. Although winter is also good for that, because there's lots of learning opportunities really from the when the weather isn't so great, or isn't so comfortable to be in.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure we'll touch on this again. I just had that moment where I felt, oh, I just need to ask that. So, what is it at the moment that you are focusing on, Sarah?
So, with Think Like a Tree and Think Like a Forest, I'm focusing on, with Think Like a Tree is with people who want to come and learn nature's secrets, essentially, to living a life of happiness, purpose, well-being, and also a life that contributes to creating a better world. And then with businesses and organizations, it's similar, but obviously then it's learning about regenerative leadership, regenerative business and organizations, which is about how to align their businesses and organizations and leadership styles with the way that life operates, which is essentially kind of the definition of what regenerative business is. So it's all deeply connected with nature and living systems, but far from being kind of new age and woo woo, it's actually really tapping into uh, everything from quantum physics to biology, ecology, and people like Einstein were very into this approach as well. So this is actually drawing on a lot of different disciplines, and regenerative is a word that we're going to be hearing much more about in terms of business and organizations going forwards.
Yeah, I would imagine most people who hear regeneration think of Doctor Who.
Exactly. I mean, there could be that kind of tech solutions thought to it. And so, therefore, bringing it right back to thinking about how life operates. So, life's got 3.8 billion years of success. And there are fundamental reasons for that. And I've kind of made it my mission over the last, or I don't know, many years to learn what those secrets are in nature. And some of them will seem obvious, like resilience. So when we walk in a forest, we can see resilience, but we can also see the way that nature cycles energy and materials through, we might call it recycling, but that's only one really small element of how life operates without sort of toxicity and waste. There's also, adaptability, innovation, creativity, purpose, which is obviously very pertinent to what we're talking about now. And we can learn from all of those things from living systems. The biggest barrier to doing that is actually mindsets, because there are so many mindsets that have been put in place over hundreds of years to say that deep connection and learning from nature and living systems is is niche and marginal. In fact, it's how humans always operated until only really a few hundred years ago. So this is kind of a modern rediscovering, if you like, of of principles of life, and then very much saying we need to start from where we are now. This is not about looking backwards or nostalgia, but actually, we are in a technological age. We are in an age of crises like climate and ecological. We are in an age of psychological crises, mental health crises. But this approach, when we evolve it together, inspired by living systems, is really the only way that actually has been proven to work on planet Earth in terms of being sustainable and resilient long term.
I have so many questions. I will start with, how long has this been your mission?
Well, that is a really interesting question, and one that I've been kind of exploring recently. I was in the woods with Giles Hutchins last week, who is a regenerative leadership trainer, and we were in these beautiful woods with rhododendrons, and it really took me back to my childhood, because I grew up in Charnwood Forest in Leicestershire and used to make dens in the rhododendrons. And for me, that place was always a place of familiarity, and looking back on it, it was also a place of deep learning. So I really started to question, really quite early on in life, why things in our kind of societies, economies, worlds, etc., why they were broken, essentially. When, for me, intuitively, I saw this model in the forest that seemed to be working, and yet we weren't using that in our in human lives, really. So one example, which I also shared in my book, I said to my mum when I was about 7, "If I die, mum, will you bury me on the compost heap?" Now, at the time, she said, "No, that's not how it works." But really, thinking about that reminded me that, for me, that just seemed totally natural. I was part of the earth. If I died, I'd return to the earth and be recycled and feed other life. And yet, of course, that's not how, as I grew up, I kind of saw the world working. So I went and studied economics and politics and French at university, and then worked for a big, the UK's largest refugee charity as a legal representative, kind of looking for answers, I guess, to how the world could be different. Because in my eyes, things I could see how I've always been able to see how things could be different. And so I wanted to actually do things that really manifested that into the world, that would then kind of create connections that other people could share. Um, in 20 so and then 21 years ago, 2003, we uh bought a small holding in South Derbyshire, and it gave me an opportunity to really kind of get my hands into the soil in terms of creating somewhere where I wanted to bring up my children and where we could grow healthy food. And so this was kind of all part of this process of creating things differently. And through that, I discovered regenerative disciplines such as permaculture and biomimicry, and then regenerative leadership, and all of these things. And then decided that that's what I was going to dedicate my life to when my refugee work came to an end, due to the charity that I work for kind of folding, unfortunately. So it was kind of a segue then back into that kind of that more sustainability, regenerative focus.
And it's really interesting that you say that you've had this lens that you can see that things have been broken or are broken, and that you've seen that nature has provided all of this evidence over the 3.8 billion years of success that you referenced. And you said you're making it your mission to learn all these secrets, and your lifetime in the sort of timeline of where we've been to where we are heading, and whatever, it's just a tiny little step. What do you see able to shift in this moment in your time that will then go forward to create a more sustainable future?
Yes, I think we are in very interesting times at the moment, and I think that provides sort of two perspectives. So one is a perspective of um, frustration, I guess. And kind of, things could be so different. Why do we seem so stuck? But then also, when you look from a living systems perspective, you see this concept of tipping points. So you see that when just prior to big shifts in either culture or living systems, whether that be human or non-human, we see this period of turbulence, and that's what I believe that we're living in now. And then you have a tipping point. So to be able to see beyond that tipping point into a future whereby millions of people are doing this work. The really interesting thing is, at the moment, is that there are millions of people actually doing this work. They're just not getting the publicity in the mainstream. So we've got this kind of, almost like living in two worlds: the world that we see in the media, which is huge amount of doom and gloom, and then the world that we see with millions of people planting trees or doing things in their local community, or transitioning their businesses to be more sustainable, or you know having amazing podcasts. There is so many, writing books. There are so many people doing brilliant things, and yet, there's so that's kind of what motivates me. And also, what I know from studying living systems is that everything's connected. So by me doing stuff that I feel is positively contributing to the world, then that's sending ripples out. I don't even need to know what those ripples are. That's the great thing. And often I'll get somebody say, "Oh, I met you at an event 5 years ago, and now, and this is what happened as a result of that meeting," or "I read your book and this is what happened." And that's fantastic to know, but I don't need to know. I just need to know that I am doing things that I feel are positive and aligned with this regenerative approach for the world.
Incredible. So help me understand The resilience that you mentioned in the forest, that nature cycles energy around and that it has this way of operating without toxicity and waste. And yet, we are surrounded by waste and we don't see it as what we recognize it's a problem. But on a daily basis, we, I say we, I'm saying in general, people then continue to put things into a bin and not really think about where that's going to go. They just think that's now out of my world.
Absolutely. This is what's happened. We become so embedded in these systems that are invested in effectively creating waste and doing things in a way that harms and extracts from the rest of the living world and from humans, to be honest, because we are also nature. There's hugely extractive processes in all of these systems. But essentially, if we actually look at the history, which I'm not going to go into it now, but if we look at the history of where kind of things went wrong, then actually there are very clear turning points from when humans were able to live in a much more nature aligned way, and then there were certain things that happened, and what we can do is we can actually see those shifts as shifts in mindset, worldviews and values. So actually, yes, of course our actions changed, or human actions changed beyond those, but it was essentially because of changes in what we valued. So one big shift, just as an example, was there was a huge worldview shift when humans saw um, basically the all living beings as kin, as family. So that was one of the shifts. Now humans, if you pick up any business report, other living beings are really resources. So that huge shift from, a tree is my family to trees are resources, that obviously then dictates what actions we then take beyond that. So we do need, and part of the regenerative approach is actually shifting those worldviews and values to ones that are more aligned with how living systems work. Now, the really great news about doing that is actually the regenerative approach is much more beneficial for humans and other living beings. So we do, as nature does, create win-wins in the way that we live. So humans are very much used to living in this mindset of scarcity. So, for example, if you win, I lose. We've got there's a model of competition and scarcity, and that somehow we've got a fixed pie that we have to share up, and we have to try and get the most that we can. Now, if you look at the model of living systems, it doesn't operate like that. Living systems come together and then grow. You get these emergent properties that means that life grows, gets more lush, if you like, more diverse, more and more life builds. So there's then enough to go round, because we have this shift to this mindset of abundance. So this is kind of just an example of how these mindset shifts can have really profoundly beneficial outcomes for people, as well as for other living beings. And that's what we see, obviously in the courses that we run, and the resources that we put out there. The feedback from that is that a lot of what troubles people about themselves, for example, their own mental well-being and the way that they're interacting as part of this planet, all of that is benefited by this regenerative approach.
Mention a tipping point. What is needed for us to gather enough momentum to tip?
I mean, it would be great if everybody was shifting en masse to regenerative approaches. But realistically, we don't actually need that. So tipping points show us that we only need a certain percentage, maybe even as small as say 10%, to have these really profound tipping points. Because essentially, once people start to see the benefits, then you get these knock on. That's what a tipping point is. Then you get this kind of momentum that is created. So again, that's hugely motivating to think that if we keep going in the right direction and everybody does a bit, then we can create that momentum. Now, obviously, we are in times at the moment where, with the climate, for example, and the destruction of um, biodiversity, there is definitely, I do feel, a sense of urgency. And so the days of saying everyone just does a little bit, though that's kind of part of that old mindset, really. Really, what I am trying to support with is that mindset shift, really, of of a lot of people kind of shifting to this more regenerative worldview.
And you mentioned that when you were talking about the nature and being deeply connected with nature and living systems, that this is not woo woo, that there is a lot of physics and science, and particularly quantum physics and ecology and biology you mentioned. The scientists are really struggling to be heard and recognized for what they're trying to flag here.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because as humans, we are wired not to want to hear long-term bad news. It just doesn't really register in terms of the way that we evolved to receive information. And making short-term sacrifices, which is how it's portrayed, for long-term benefit, is something that is quite a difficult sell. And that's why sustainability, I think, it can be problematic, because the message is all about what you've got to give up. And I think this is one thing that is really attractive about regenerative approaches rather than sustainability, or the more kind of doom and gloom approach, which is the reality approach. Don't get me wrong, but that's what we're hearing. The regenerative approach says, let's come together and create visions for the future that we want. And we know that that is possible because there are people already doing all of this stuff that we need to do. There are people already doing regenerative agriculture. There are people already running businesses in a regenerative way. There's already communities who are really coming together for big bioregional shifts. We need to just join all of that up, really. And so I've done, as part of a community project that I co-founded 10 years ago, then we did a lot of visioning in our local community, for example, brought people together and said, what is the future that you want for Melbourne? And the really interesting thing is, when you start doing that long-term visioning, then actually all of the petty kind of short-term politicking type stuff falls away, because actually what you find is that we are all pretty much united in what we actually want to see in our local communities, in our businesses, etc. And that is things like, clean air. We want good education. We want good healthcare. All of these things have the potential to unite us if we can get away from that short-termist thinking about, that very much sort of scarcity, much more combative approach that we obviously see in the media.
I really understand the principles of life that you mentioned earlier, the importance and the purpose of this work. Essentially, it is a planet that is at critical point right now, and it's not insignificant. And you're talking about regenerative farming and agriculture and just the whole regenerative approach, full stop, popularized more recently, I would say, from dare I even mention his name in your podcast? But Jeremy Clarkson in on his farm in Diddley Squat has been mixing the wheat with the beans, and it's great because then you're actually popularizing a technique that is of benefit, and it does bring it to the masses. Those type of programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did watch it with some reluctance, I have to say. But I thought once I heard that he was bringing in regenerative agriculture, I thought yes. And my son was saying, "You must watch this, Mum." So yeah, but that is so different from 10 years ago, even when this kind of idea of learning from nature for our agriculture was seen to be really, really niche. And now it's seen as Jeremy Clarkson was saying, we can't not do it because the soil is dying. There are very few harvests left. And the same approach that we can use for agriculture in building soil is pretty much the same approach that we use in businesses in building cultures that are healthy and grow healthy people. So on the one hand, we're learning from living systems in terms of healthy soils, but because humans are ecosystems too, our businesses, organizations, communities are also ecosystems. We can use the same principles to build healthy cultures. So if you take the comparison, how in the same way as we can kind of spread a load of artificial chemicals on our soil and pesticides and killing killing the life, the same thing is often happening in our organizations. So if you think about the talent within organizations and teams that is lying dormant, so we're hearing about huge percentages of people say that they're not engaged at work. Huge percentages of young people are saying that they simply don't want to work in organizations where they're not valued. The regenerative approach says, okay, so let's look at the life that is in our teams and the potential that is in our communities, and let's nurture that. So instead of having restrictive practices that treat people as numbers, as machines, because essentially that's the mindset we're trying to transition away from, then instead of doing that, we say, okay, so let's look at everybody as individuals and see that the unique potential within individuals and therefore diversity within teams is actually a source of health. It's a source of energy. It's a source of new ideas, innovation. And all of that is very, very, very much aligned with, the same as the regenerative agriculture approach.
And that seems like a perfect place to talk about purpose, because we're talking about the values, the strengths, the gifts, what people bring to the space, particularly in organizations, but also just in general in life. What is it that you are doing with your whole self? So tell me more. What does purpose mean in your work?
So one of the things that we do with whether it be individuals or whether it be businesses and organizations, we start with observation. So we say, what can you observe in your ecosystems right now? But the second thing that we then focus on in this sort of design process that we use with people is, what is your vision? So we're looking at long-term visioning and then some more kind of medium and shorter term visioning. What do you actually want your life, your business, your organization, your team to look like, and more importantly, to feel like? Because actually what happens is when you take people through this experience of visioning long term, instead of thinking about what things look like, which is so often what we're used to, we start to tap into, well, what actually does it feel like when your team is working in harmony? What does it feel like when you've got exciting new products that you're bringing to the market? What does it feel like when you're aligned with your values? So that's a really big part of the process. And what we find with doing that is what is really important to people then falls out. That then comes to the fore, and then it's much easier to fit the what after that, because that you're deeply tapping into what is really gets you up in the morning. And then, say for example, with a business and organization, we'll do that on an organizational basis, but then we'll say, okay, so let's do that on an individual basis with your team members. And once you get this alignment in the vision, the purpose, and the why, then that's when really magical things start happening, because then of course people turn up for work with new ideas, with real energy and momentum to make things happen, and also that resilience. So when things are difficult, then tapping back into that reason, that aligned reason of why you're actually doing this, can get everybody through really, really tough times. And there is no doubt at the moment we are living through tough times, and we're going to see more. So, to actually develop this vision and purpose as part of a resilience strategy, these things are all interlinked, because that's what we see in the living world, that all of these things everything's connected. So creating a resilient ecosystem with all of these approaches is what needs to happen.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, nature is hard to define. In fact, I'll ask you for a definition of nature and see then if I can build my question off the back of that.
Yeah, so I define nature as all of the living world. Um, and but there are various other definitions. So the dictionary definition, which there is actually a campaign to change at the moment, doesn't include humans in the definition of nature. So that is problematic. Some people would include things like water and rocks in their definition of nature. I tend not to, because my work predominantly arises around studying living systems. But yes, so even that's complex.
So we're all part of this living world. I'm subscribed to that definition. If that's the case, and humans are simply a part of it, will the rest of the living world ever work against us in a way to help themselves grow, help nature move forward? Or are we a more dominant force?
I like to think of humans as what's called a keystone species. So definitely as part of this regenerative transition, we need to be aligning what our place as humans is back into being part of the living world, rather than dominating over it and feeling that everything we do is about controlling nature. But the keystone species way of looking at things is that we have an important role. So actually, if you look at indigenous practices, say in South America and North America, whereas previously we believed that actually these were pristine wildernesses that hunter-gatherers were just kind of going through and picking their produce, if you like. It's not like that at all. Actually, what we see in South and North America was actually the humans were acting as species that were essentially creating fertility in the land, which allowed for more abundance for humans, but it also allowed more abundance for other living beings as well. So there is a role for us to play as these keystone species, but we need to be doing that from a place of humility rather than a place of dominance.
What I'm hearing here, Sarah, and it may be because I've recently recorded another episode and spoken about balance, in particular gender balance and the masculine and feminine traits of how things operate and how business particularly operates based on very much more masculine paradigm in terms of the domination, the goal driven purpose. I see it and had endorsed by Kathy Coleman, who I was speaking with, as more of as a feminine trait, because it is very much more the vision and the seeing things from a different perspective. You've spoken about perspectives already. What is your take on the way that we could shift from having a better balance in the way that we use our traits and our values?
Yes, it's very interesting, and it's definitely the case that that imbalance between the masculine and the feminine is part of this story of separation that we talk about. So we've got a separation between humans and the rest of the living world, and this masculine and feminine separation, and they did kind of arise in the same kind of time frames. And interestingly, just as a bit of an aside, if you look at the witch hunts, for example, in the 17th century, they were as much a destruction of nature as they were of women, because nature and women were very much seen as more connected. So anyway, that's an aside. But the balance between the masculine and the feminine, I think it's really important to say that these all genders have masculine and feminine traits within them. So this is not about men versus women. This is about a rebalancing of those traits. And it's also about shining a light on what society and business and the economy has valued. And that's what's created the imbalance, really. And so, therefore, by shining a light on that, we can see actually, I work with a lot of men who, when you bring forward those uh, invitations to tap into how they feel about the future, or what they feel when they walk in the woods, that it's definitely there. It's more about having permission and having that invitation to rebalance that in general. So I think it's a very important thing that we need to definitely be speaking more about.
You've spoken about biomimicry and permaculture. There was one other I didn't catch that you mentioned as part of regenerative work.
Yeah, so there's regenerative leadership, and regenerative agriculture. Rewilding has certain elements of this as well. So there are a lot of disciplines that have regenerative elements in. Some have more of the mindset shift in than others, but essentially they're all learning from how living systems operate.
And with all of these different elements, it's interesting that you studied economics, politics, French at university in terms of understanding from the perspective of how the world needs to operate from different perspectives in terms of the economics particularly, and also the politics, and you also did your the legal work for the charity with the refugees and things, so you understand people, you understand the mechanics of living, and now you're talking about living systems. It's this going back to this question that you had of how could the world be different. Is there a very clear vision for you of what this is?
It's really interesting, because this is one of the things that we have to learn to get uncomfortable with, in a way, the not knowing. So part of the shift from this mechanistic, reductionist control mindset towards the regenerative living systems mindset is to say that we can never know how things are going to work out. that any thought of doing that is just simply an illusion that humans have put in place to try and feel a little bit more comfortable. But actually, when we embrace the not knowing of what it looks like, what we then do is open up all the potential for all of the people and the other living beings to co-create this future. Now, of course, I've got some really great ideas of what mine might look like, for anybody interested, then Rob Hopkins' podcast is a really, really good one. That From What Is to What Next, I think it's called, and that he invites people to set out their vision of 2030 in lots of different areas. So that's a really good starting point. And I know, that I love listening to that and imagining that different future. But we mustn't get too caught up in what it looks like. It's more, for me, it's more important what it actually feels like. We feel connected, we feel empowered, we feel empowered from a place of humility, not of dominance and control. We feel more in balance. So all of these things are being brought forward, and that overall we're going to have much more healthy, resilient, and happy people, as well as part of a healthier planet too.
And it makes a lot of sense. You touched on the people not being engaged at work and not feeling valued or fulfilled in what they're doing. When you ask some of those people, because I have asked them and I experience it a lot, especially in my coaching work, they actually don't know what they want to feel. And this is the shift, is like they know what they don't like and what's not working, but they don't have that knowledge of what they actually want. And it's hard to then measure something that you don't even know what it is.
And this comes from, a lot of this is ingrained in our education system. And so asking a young person, what do you want to do when you're older? Why is it all about doing? Why are we even asking anybody that question? It should be much more, what do you want to feel like? What does it look like, but in a very rounded sense, when you are living the life that you want to live? You'll get and I'm sure when you do ask people, but when I ask people these questions, you get a very different answer from the what do you want to do, which really is people are much more likely then to come up with something that somebody else thinks they should do, or what they think they should do, or what our education system was designed to do, which was basically churn out people for essentially roles in business that are enriching somebody else, not them. And that is just not the way it's not the way that life operates anywhere else other than the human world. So why would we not want to shift away from that?
We could have a whole conversation on that alone, Sarah, and
Yes.
we've run out of time, but I am with you, and this has been an incredible starting point, I'm sure, for so many people just to think or feel differently about the future. How would someone reach out to you if they're thinking, I need to hear more about what Sarah's saying today?
So you can find out all the information about what we do, because it's myself and a team of Think Like a Tree facilitators at the Think Like a Tree website. So that's thinklikeatree.co.uk. And obviously, and then I'm Sarah Spencer on LinkedIn as well. So very, very happy to connect with people on there too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for literally, I just feel like you've shone a light on a glimpse. It's like just a little portal into the woods and onto maybe just one patch of it. And thank you for that. It's been a really, really fascinating conversation. And I will certainly be exploring more in my Reflections with Actions episode on many of these elements. How would you like to close out today?
I'd like to close out with an invitation, because so much of what our modern life is about takes place in our head, and thinking, and in particular this kind of much more left brain approach to the world. So what I'd like to invite people to do is just head out into whatever nearby nature is, and really think about, just observe what's around you and observe how life is operating, and just sense into that, really, and make that connection. And then if you want to take it a step further, think about, okay, so what could nature teach me? And do that from a place of humility, because often, instead of shutting things down, let's be opening up to this wisdom of the forest. And then absolutely everybody has something to learn from the forest, I can tell you.
What value have you gained from tuning into Focus on Why today? What are your reflections with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or via LinkedIn and share how Focus on Why has made a difference to you. Your feedback not only will inspire others, but will help them to discover how Focus on Why has created powerful ripple effects. Let's continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or X, join the Focus on Why Facebook group, and sign up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus, to keep in touch. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.